Hi, Scott Maple here from Kropserkel. Today we are going to be putting together one of our B Cylon helmet kits, and I wanted to show you the process about what we do with the ABS parts that are vacuum metallized here in order to make sure that we have a nice and even fit between these two components. And I'm going to show you the technique that I've used in putting these pieces together and the measurements. The first step in measuring off this component is to find the nasal section here, which is just above the visor. It's the narrowest component. This is just one of the markation points that are used here, and I measure this off to be 1.5 centimeters, and I'm going to do this evenly for both sides. So that first one I've marked, you can see already with the marker. As I reach the top of this mohawk section, I'm going to make this 3 centimeters. I'm going to mark it right over the corner here. You can kind of see from that side and this side where that's going to be. I'm also using my thumb here to keep that at the 3 centimeter mark as we go down, and I'm going to just mark a few points along this edge just to make sure when I'm grinding and cutting this piece out that I'm following. The first things I always like to stress when working with materials and cutting out things like this, because the ABS does get quite hot when you're cutting it out and there are pieces flying around. In this case, I've got a NIOSH approved dust mask. The ear protection, because you're doing cutting out, it does make a very loud noise. Goggles to protect my eyes, and this face shield has really worked well, and it also allows you to have a good fit with the mask and the face shield, and everything works together well when cutting out the parts. In this case I use a Dremel. Now this is a big one. It's a little bit awkward to hold on to if you're getting into tight confined places and cutting out things, but I found that the strength that comes from this one, the speed of the rotation, is just something you got to work with. I've got a diamond cutoff wheel, a drum sanding thing which will come in later, and 220 grit and 120 grit sandpaper. So I've got my points marked off on the helmet, Dremel ready. I'm going to go from the inside. This is a very coarse cut. It's basically just for the purpose of removing the part from the larger form. I'm really trying to make a symmetrical cut here so that both sides will fit together. I've only got 2 points to mark here, so I can tell what that plane should be from here across here, which will also go across this nose bridge piece. You're going to want to cut this section open as much as possible. The wider you cut this open on both sides, the larger the aperture for your head to get in. You can have either 2.5 centimeters or 3 centimeters on each side, which will make either a 5 or 6 centimeter mohawk. And the faceplate is forgiving enough that goes in from behind that you can actually have a full centimeter difference to make it broader if you need it to be. They don't need to be refined yet, but you do need to come back and cut out this eye section for the faceplate. Do that by coming in and working at it from the inside. The more that I cut off now, the less I'm going to have to grind off. And you can see there's still a fairly wide band of material that has to come off of this piece. And this is really where, if you played Operation as a kid, certainly does help me in this job. And I want to try to get it as close to where that reflection changes, the curve of that edge. It's very important that you don't cut this section out before you hit the belt sander. If you are trying to grind after you've cut that piece out, if you've cut this section out first, you can imagine the vibration that's going to happen on this piece on the board, and it will create a very uneven cut here. Having the stability of having that piece of ABS still in place is very important. We're at the stage now where it's been entirely cut out, and we've still got rough sections that need to be taken off. So if you look here at the front, you'll see that just from the grinding on the belt sander, there might be a section that appears slightly lighter, discolored from the friction that has been created. And on that piece, I'm just going to use a fine file and take that down. I always go back with a bit of sandpaper just to ensure that I've got a very clean edge on this. In this case, I'm using 220 grit, and I'm holding it in such a way that I'm never going to go over onto this reflective surface. With the helmet halves now cut out and prepared, what we want to do is we want to create the indentation painted sections, and I'm going to do a masking job for that. Firstly, I'm going to take electrical tape because I like the fact that it can create a nice clean edge. Cut 3 9-inch lengths in this case, and not stretch this tape out. It's really easy to want to stretch electrical tape. It will retract back on itself, and that is not what you want to have happen. And cut down the center of each. The straight edge is going to be that one. Again, you have to really use the light to evaluate where that curvature is. And this is, again, just going to create that inner, like, really sharp line against this surface. This is the surface that will be painted. It takes the curve much easier because it's not a broad piece. I'm going to use a plastic wrap to mask off the major portions of this. And you really have to be careful that you don't perforate the film when you're putting it on, because even that smallest hole, if you're spray painting it, could paint onto the surface. I go in with a painter's tape. Go and just put it over the edge of the saran wrap or the plastic wrap, and make sure that I've got part of the surface of that tape making contact with the electrical tape. And kind of put it over that plastic wrap. If it's coming too far this way, tack it down and just move it back slightly so I can actually control where that plastic edge is going to be on the mask. And I can see this is actually starting to protrude a bit, so I'm actually just, see, I tacked it down first and I'm pulling back. Again, little pieces is the best way to go because I can actually take that curve. And there we go. I like the Rust-Oleum satin granite finish to finish these two quadrants of the helmet. And as I explained before, I want to just run my finger down across that, making sure that it's not come up anywhere on both pieces. This is not the time you want to make that mistake. Looks good. You do not want to have too much to build up. So I'm just, as you can see, I'm just sort of feathering the edges of it. I don't want to build up the material too much around those points, because then it will want to seep. Spray off to the side here, make sure I've got the amount of pigment I need. And again, very light coats. You don't need to try to get it to completely cover it in one coat. In fact, you don't want to do that. Once the paint is thoroughly dried, we can then commence to carefully remove the mask, venting from the overspray. Just got to make sure that, again, you've given it sufficient time to dry, because you don't want to be smearing that paint around or affecting the surfaces with uncured paint. And we're down to now the electrical tape, which is the final mask point. Just work a fingernail under one of these corners here. There's almost always residue from this tape. You can see there's a little bit right there as well. The best thing to pick that up is the tape itself. So I'm just peeling back here, and I can see there's a few points here, just the edges. But I want to do this very slowly. I just want to make sure that I'm not going to rip up that surface underneath. You just dab on it. So for example, this area here, just press down and it comes right up. This is the raw cut faceplate section, and what I'm going to do is, because there's a bit of flange that's left from the casting in here, I just want to make sure that's going to be opened up and as clean as possible for when the lens itself is going to get put in. So again, I'm going to use the belt sander to do this phase. That slot may need to be heat adjusted. You can do that with a hairdryer or a heat gun. Once the lens is mounted in there, you just want to make sure that you're going to have enough of a space to see out over top of that section with the LED array mounted in the bottom half of it. I'm going to open up that slot just a bit more. As part of the preparation for the painting of the cast faceplates, the surfaces that will receive the adhesive tape or come into contact with it, I just want to make sure that there's going to be no residual oils or anything that exists on them, just to make sure that we've got the best possible adhesion. After I'm certain that the surface is perfectly clean, there are some areas that we're going to apply this Scotch Outdoor tape to, and this is prior to painting it. The castings are naturally black. I add a pigment to them so that they are solid black, which actually works well with the finish that they receive afterwards. And I've cross-hatched across this nose bridge area because this is all section that will be covered by the vacuum metallized plates. I really like to have a good tooth that is happening there, and if you look very carefully you can see it's that cross-hatching. So once we're at this point where now we've scored it, I'm going to take these sections of the tape and I'm going to run them down both sides. And I'm cutting this section here where I've got the flat edge that runs up against this side. With this lower portion, I'm going to cut and just peel back as I'm going here. Rust-Oleum Universal Metallic, which is a carbon mist color. I like it because it's a black, but it's got a fleck in it, a more interesting characteristic in the paint. So again, we go in really light here, spraying the whole surface, and you got to kind of spray up because you have to get both up under all of those louvers. The tape which is down there is going to have the best adhesion without being tacked to a painted surface. With the polyurethane faceplate now painted, a nice and wide open gap here so that I can have the space to put the LED array in there and still to be able to see over it open air. The beauty of not having a lens or any kind of material between your eyes and the outside of this helmet, one, it provides ventilation, and two, there's nothing to fog up because I find that correct placement there. I want to be able to see above the array just to create this gap before gluing it down. These are very simple little pieces of plastic that I collected. You can find anything to really accomplish the same. It's just more or less trying to keep a gap when I'm gluing it together. I need a bunch of them. And I'm actually going to wedge these between so that I'm not creating friction against that part. I don't want to be scratching the paint off it. So once I've got two in place, I can then just start wedging them in between there just to open that gap up as much as I need to. And I'm going to do this on the other side as well. What I'm really working to do here is to keep the array towards the bottom part of this polyurethane casting because it will not be stuck to the top. Polyurethane is rather flexible, but we still don't want to snap it off. This section here is where that will happen. If you have to bend your this section up to create a wider gap, you may do so by using a hair dryer or a heat gun, generally in these areas. You want to pass over them both so that they're relatively flexible at the same time. You can just use your thumbs to move them up. And here we are looking at the inside, and I can see now that I have the correct amount of spacing. The LEDs are set back. We want to be careful that we're not jamming this into your nose. I actually put a piece of foam on the inside to make sure that's not uncomfortable on the bridge of your nose. Going back again with the plumbing goop. A thin line that's going to go up onto the polyurethane first, because it will work its way down onto the part. You can tell this is a freshly opened bottle because it's very free flowing, but it will freeze, it won't go right through. And I'm just going to move that over and to bridge that section because I just want to create that contact. It will also flow a little bit between the LEDs, and that actually makes for some nice diffusion of the light itself. This is a technique that I've found to be most useful when working to put the two helmet halves together and make sure that there's some stability between them. I'm using a sheet of ABS, but you need not be limited to this particular material. I'm sure there are other things that you can use. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create an abutment to basically make the parts level with each other, and I'll show you the technique when I do that. First, let's make some of these. This is a 6-inch section. I'm going to need about 5 of these to run the inside length. And you want to use a steel ruler whenever you score ABS. Very light score should make it easy. So just set that piece off. I'm going to create these score marks along this particular edge. I like to do the front section of the helmet in one glue session. Along this nose ridge here, which is the finer piece, I want to make sure that I've got like a cross hatch version of the same thing. Being careful not to go up onto the edge of that surface. I'm going to brush all that away, and I'm going to want to do that on both sides. I'm being careful as well to not go and create deep grooves because I don't want to be scoring this material to the point where it's going to want to snap along those lines. It's a very light marking on just the surface. I'm ready now to put in the abutment piece onto the inside of the helmet here. And what I'm looking at is the curvature of this particular section. This is the one I'm going to start with. That's the leading edge of the front of the helmet. And these are 1 inch wide. It's the same thickness as the tape. So it's a good guideline. It actually ends up working out fine when you're putting these two pieces together that there is enough on both sides there to stick out. You may find that it is beneficial to cut this lower section down just slightly, so that there's no issue at the lowest part. Now the key to making this work is you look at the curvature along the inside of this. You can see there's a slight curve to the original helmet shape, and a straight piece is going to create a gap, and we don't want that. So I'm just going to go in, and the ABS is very malleable. You can just create a slight curvature on it, flexing it around. You can do this in with your hands. I just want to make sure that there's not going to be any gap that exists between there. And I'm going to start just by putting this one piece. I will connect the two halves together, and I'm going to go right to the edge, like I'm going to make contact with the other side of that. Not quite go right down to the lowest point. When the face casting goes into here, there's going to be some occupation of this void. Just press it all down. And again, what this is going to do is create a nice level and firm surface for both of the halves to come together. We can now take the piece that's got the adhesive on it and the part that is to mate with here on this side. We're going to then be able to bring them together in the front. And I'm going to start with my finger here, making sure that I've got this going to go together level. And from the inside, I can just go in and press my finger down, making sure that we're getting this all to go together. A clamp, and I'm going to put one clamp that has soft feet on it. So now we've got this piece in here as well, stabilizing it. And we're ready to go back with the third piece. And the third piece is at the 6-inch length, so we've got 6 inches from here to here. And as you can see, the remainder of this is going to be curved. So I can now create that curve. Take that band off. And we're ready for this next piece. So you can see on the inside, that first one is nice and straight, halfway on these parts. So there we go. There's the next one. And again, I've got my finger on the outside of this as well. On the outside of the two plates, making sure that they're going together without having a step. The last piece, I just measure by putting it in here, and I can see, I'll just hold it with my fingernail, an approximation of making that distance up. And something I'm going to do here, because I can see there's a slight gap, is go back with a couple of clamps before we do go to the glue phase. Trying to get these as close as possible. And you don't want to go too much pressure either, because you don't want to be creating a V on that area that's making contact with itself. So there you have it. It's all connected along there. And this stage right now does not have the faceplate in it. Do not worry about what's happening here at the nose section. We want to do that at the very end when we go and fit the faceplate in. I'm going to take a section of material that is an automotive product. It's used to protect the edges of your car door. It's open at one side, it's got an adhesive in the core, and it's basically like a C that you just press onto this. The reason I like to do this part at this phase is because it actually does help to stabilize the shape. I do like the properties of this, which is a good grab, but it is also removable. I'm going to use a little wooden stir stick. I just like to spread that around and make sure that I'm going around all of these supports. This will flow quite well initially. So now we've got the helmet with the halves all glued together. It's essentially all together now. This is the part that I'm concerned about now, and that is making sure that these two nose bridge pieces will be at the correct length when I put the faceplate in. So before I'm going to do that, I'm going to put the faceplate, which has its tape on it. I'm not going to take the tape safety off. I'm going to just feed this faceplate into the back of the helmet here. And what I'm looking for here is to make sure that I've got the correct lines going on the bridge of that nose, and it looks like it's going to work out perfectly. Now, if this had not worked out, I would just have a needle file here, and very carefully I would file those edges flat to make sure that they're going to mate up against each other correctly. Having tweezers or fingernails is helpful. Again, you just want to feed it into the corner there. I'm being careful not to touch down those points yet. I just want to make sure that these two peaks are going to be matching the peaks on the casting faceplate section, and I also want to make sure that they're going to cover up the tape. So I can tack down one side slightly. I'm not going to press it down too much, but just put it into place. And then the other one. And here there's a bit of movement there. It's because I haven't permanently tacked them down. And once I've got them lined up, then I'm going to start applying pressure from the inside and the outside to make sure that they're going to tack down. Excellent. Now that will give me enough of a hold to go back now, work towards the inside. I'm going to move the electronic section there into the mohawk, just to keep it out of the way. I don't want it to get caught up. And with the goop, I'm going to go on both sides. Once into this side. I'm not going to go with too much because it flows a lot, and I don't want it to flow out of control on the inside of the helmet too much. Once into both sides here. About an inch long solid glob of the material. I'm going to start with that. Move that material around on the inside. Sort of spread it into the corners. And what's happening is it will flow down from the top of the casting down into that edge and will create a really strong contact between these two pieces. I'm going to go back with another little glob, and I'm going to put it into here, right at the top of that section in here. Very small little piece, about 1/2 inch squeeze, and on the other side as well. You can see that. I'm just going to move this along that contact. It's just partially up on the cast portion, and the other part of it is flowing down onto the ABS part. And within about 2 hours, it's strong enough to hold itself on its own. So I'm going to put that into a place that will be situated like this so that it's not creating too much of a flow. I want that to be positioned downward. Here's the array unit, and I've cut out sections of Velcro here, which are going to match to it. I'm going to put the hook on the bottom. And this is just to protect the terminals and also make sure that we're going to have access to the controls of this when it's inside the helmet. Putting a section of loop Velcro so that the circuit can be positioned there. And as you can see, we still have access to the programming button and the potentiometer. So with a small jeweler's tool or a screwdriver, you can adjust the sweep speed of the eye unit there. And over here we have the power switch, which we just positioned back. I've also cut another section of Velcro. I'm going to use this to tack it down. The reason I like to do this rather than gluing it in is because it does keep it serviceable. So I've put the switch there, so it's sticking out one end of the Velcro. And I want to make sure that the adapter for the battery is sticking out on the other side there. So I've got this part sticking out here. And I want to make sure that I'm not going to make that wire tight from the circuit. So I'm going to try to keep it as lax as I can. Keeping the tape. Self-adhesive multi-purpose closed cell insulating foam tape that I like to use. I like this because it's strips of padding, and you really don't need to have very broad sections of padding in your helmet. It's more about comfort and aeration in here. So the less we actually have, the better. I run 2 pieces in strips. These are going to be the 2 side pieces that I will be using. And I'm following this lower ridge, which you can see is part of the contour of the helmet from the inside. It's the bottom line. And I've cut 2 vertical pieces, which are going to also follow that line of the indentation, also visible from the inside. So there you have it. It's a nicely framed bit of padding. So we have the 9-volt battery tethered here away from your head, and I'm just going to hit the power switch. And there you have it, the completed Kropserkel Cylon helmet.